My name is Ruth, and this is Lexi and Sadie. Today we're going to be talking to you about the clinical evaluation of language fundamentals, or the CELF 5. So what is the CELF 5? It is a standardized assessment instrument that includes a battery of tests. It is used to assess receptive and expressive language and communication skills through a variety of tasks. It is useful for ages 5 to 21 and for individuals from a variety of backgrounds. As I said, the CELF is a battery of tests, and it includes 16 different tests that can stand alone or can be combined to form composite or index scores. This is just an overview of the tests that are included. Now we're going to talk a little bit about each specific one.
Okay, so this first component of the CELF 5 is called the Observational Rating Scale. It is an optional rating scale that can be completed by the parent, teacher, or the student to provide more information about the student's communication abilities and skills in different settings such as the classroom or at home. And this would be appropriate for ages 5 to 21. The next subtest of the CELF 5 is sentence comprehension, and it is used to measure the student's ability to comprehend grammatical rules in sentences by requiring the student to point to a picture in the stimulus book after the clinician says the sentence orally. And this would be appropriate for ages 5 to 8. The next subtest is linguistic concepts, and it is used to measure the student's ability to understand linguistic concepts such as middle, different, and many. And this is done by asking the student to point to objects that are in the stimulus book in response to given oral directions by the clinician that contain these concepts. And this would be appropriate for ages 5 to 8.
Okay, the next subtest is the word structure subtest, and this subtest is useful for measuring the child's acquisition of morphological rules, including distinctions of number, case, tense, and some examples of these would be things like plural s and irregular past tense verbs. And this is accomplished through having the student look at a visual stimulus and complete an orally presented sentence with the target structure. And this subtest is useful for ages 5 to 8. The next subtest is the word classes subtest, and it is used to measure the child's ability to understand relationships between words. So the child chooses 2 of 3 or 4 presented words that are related, and with the younger students, they are shown a visual stimulus. So an example for this subtest of how it is administered is the examiner shows a page from the stimulus book with a picture of a marker, a pencil, and a strawberry, and then the examiner directs the child to choose which 2 go together best. So the child would need to choose marker and pencil. And this is appropriate for ages 5 to 21. And the next subtest is the following directions. So this one is used to measure the ability of the child to interpret, recall, and also to execute oral directions that will increase in length and complexity. And so it's accomplished through having the student point to shapes in the stimulus book in response to directions that the examiner or clinician gives, and they increase in length and complexity. And this one is appropriate for ages 5 to 21. The next subtest is formulating sentences. It is done to measure the child's ability to formulate sentences that are grammatically and semantically correct, and increasing as they increase in length and complexity when they are given certain constraints. To do this, they are using a visual stimulus as a reference, and they'll need to formulate a sentence about the picture using a target word or 2 that they are given. So an example would be when they are shown a picture of a library scene and instructed to make a sentence using the word reading. They should make the sentence related to the picture and it has to contain the target word. And as the testing progresses, more words would be added, so they would have to make a sentence with 2 words instead of 1. This is appropriate for ages 5 to 21. The next subtest is recalling sentences, and it is done to measure the child's ability to recall and reproduce sentence structures of increasing length and complexity. For this, the student imitates a sentence that is presented by the clinician. So the clinician could say, "The big brown dog ate all the cat's food." And the client would have to say it back without changing anything in the order or leaving out a word or changing a word. You don't want them to change the meaning of the word. And as it progresses, the clinician marks how many errors were made to score this one. Ages 5 to 21 is who this is appropriate for. The next subtest is understanding spoken paragraphs, and it is done to measure the child's ability to interpret information from a presented paragraph, whether it be facts or to make inferences. For this, the student answers questions about a paragraph that the examiner presents. This is appropriate for ages 5 to 21.
Okay, the next subtest is word definitions, and this is used to measure the child's ability to define words by describing the features of the word and also its relationship to other words. And this is done by having the student define a word that the clinician names and using it in a sentence. So this would be appropriate for ages 9 to 21. The next subtest is sentence assembly, and this subtest is used to measure the child's ability to put words together and make word combinations that are syntactically and semantically correct in sentences. And this is done by asking the student to produce 2 correct sentences from words or groups of words that are presented either visually and orally. And this would be appropriate for ages 9 to 21. The next subtest is semantic relationships, and it is used to measure the child's ability to interpret sentences that make comparisons, that identify locations. They may include time relationships and may use passive voice. And this is done by, after the student listens to a sentence, the student will select 2 correct choices from 4 visually or orally presented options that answer the target question. And this would be appropriate for ages 9 to 21.
The next subtest is reading comprehension, and this subtest measures the child or the individual's reading comprehension skills or ability to interpret factual and inferential information from written paragraphs, and it's done through having the student respond to orally presented questions about what he or she has just read. And this is appropriate for ages 8 to 21. The structured writing subtest is next, and this subtest measures the child's writing skills or ability to construct sentences, and it is accomplished by presenting the child with a story title or stem and having the child complete sentences or write additional and extra sentences in order to formulate a story. And this subtest is appropriate for ages 8 to 21. And then the pragmatics profile, it is useful for obtaining information regarding the development of both verbal and nonverbal social communication skills. So it is a questionnaire that is completed by the examiner following the test administration, and it can also involve input from a teacher or a parent if needed, and it is appropriate for ages 5 to 21. The last component of the CELF 5 is the pragmatics activities checklist, and it is used to identify verbal and nonverbal behaviors that a student exhibits during social settings, and these behaviors may interfere or affect communication at home or at school. For this, the examiner will engage the child in different activities throughout the session as maybe breaks from the other tests, and evaluate and observe their nonverbal and verbal language skills. And after the student leaves, the examiner completes the checklist based upon the skills that they saw during the administration. And it is appropriate for ages 5 to 21. Some of these subtests yield raw scores, which are just the number of errors made, scaled scores that are used to compare it with the normative sample. 10 is the standard, and 8 to 12 is still within normal limits. They also have confidence intervals, percentile ranks, age equivalents, and there is a growth scale value that can be used if the test has been administered to the child before to assess their progress. The subtests can be combined to make core language score or index scores. The record forms indicate which tests are used to get each score, and they differ based upon the age of the child. The core language score is a measure of the child's overall general language performance. A receptive language index can be gathered, and that is a measure of the listening and auditory comprehension skills of the child. An expressive language index score is an overall measure of the expressive language skills that the child demonstrates. The language content index score measures the child's their aspects of semantic development. The language structure index score is the overall measure of receptive and expressive components of interpreting and producing sentence structures. And the last index score is the language memory index score, and it measures the ability to recall information, follow directions, generate sentences, and interpret sentences.
Okay, and so this is an example of record form 1 that would be appropriate for ages 5 to 8. And as you can see right here, the core language score and index scores are indicated right here. So the blank space is where the score would be for the individual subtest, and they are compiled to create that sum score of the core language and for the following index scores. This is the example record form number 2, which is appropriate for ages 9 to 21. And again, it's very similar to the last one that we looked at with your individual subtests here, and then your core language score and index scores indicated here. Okay. One reason for administration is that the CELF-5 is proven an extremely valid method of identifying children with language disorders. This is proven by the high sensitivity and specificity of the assessment, and those are both at 97%. That reveals only 3% of children with language disorders were under-identified or missed, and 3% were over-identified. Overall general impressions of the test is that it is quite lengthy and requires great effort to score. It is slightly difficult to learn due to the large number of subtests and the complexity of some subtests, such as various reversal and discontinuation rules. It is judged to be not very engaging to children due to its length and the unexciting stimuli. Some of the stimuli is very simple and quite repetitive. However, an overall positive impression of the test is that it is extremely effective at identifying language disorders.
And this is a handout that we created that gives more information about the CELF-5. So we've included more details here, some information about the creators of the test, the price, and then the normative sample that was used to standardize the test, exactly how many children and from what backgrounds, and then also our overall impressions of the test. And then on the next page of the handout, we have included more information regarding the specifics of administration time. So if you need to know how long it might take depending on which parts you're going to administer, we have included that here. And then also how to score the test, the specific scores that are given, and then also how dialect plays a role in administration and scoring. And so this concludes our presentation on the CELF 5.